At some point in your life, everything will fall apart. Not slowly, not predictably, but all at once. And you won't be ready. Pause. Because what you do in the next few moments will define the kind of person you become. Not your plans, not your goals, not your intentions, your reaction. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people fail right here. They don't break because life is hard. They break because they never prepared for reality. Think about it. Everything feels fine until it isn't. You wake up one day expecting normal. Then something shifts. A message you didn't expect. A conversation that changes everything. A decision made without you. And just like that, the path you thought you were on disappears. Stop. Think about the last time that happened to you. Not a big dramatic collapse. Just something small. You checked your phone, and your mood changed instantly. You read one sentence, and suddenly everything felt uncertain. That moment right there, that's where this begins. Because adversity doesn't announce itself. It interrupts, and when it does, it asks a question most people avoid. Who are you when things don't go your way? Not when life is smooth, not when everything works, but when it doesn't. Now here's where it gets interesting. Most people think the problem is the event, the failure, the rejection, the setback. But that's not the real problem. The real problem is how quickly they lose control of themselves. Emotion takes over, frustration, confusion, anger, and within minutes, they're no longer thinking clearly. They're reacting, scrolling, complaining, blaming, trying to escape the feeling instead of understanding it. But here's what nobody tells you. That exact moment is an opportunity, not later, not after things calm down, right there, because adversity doesn't just disrupt your life, it exposes it. It shows you your habits, your thinking patterns, your emotional weaknesses, and most people don't like what they see, so they avoid it. They distract themselves just enough to not deal with it. But the problem doesn't go away. It waits, and when it comes back, it hits harder. Now here's the shift that changes everything. What if that moment isn't against you? What if it's revealing something you need to see? Let that sit, because this is where people split into two paths. Path 1, resistance. Why is this happening? This isn't fair. This shouldn't be happening to me. Path 2, awareness. What is this trying to show me? Where did I lose control? What can I improve? Same situation, different outcome. And this is where the Stoics built their strength, not in perfect conditions, but in chaos. One Stoic idea captures this perfectly. Fire tests gold. Adversity tests the brave. Read that again. Adversity doesn't create weakness. It reveals it. And that's powerful, because you can't improve what you don't see. But here's the part most people misunderstand. Seeing your weakness doesn't feel good. It feels frustrating, uncomfortable, sometimes even embarrassing, because it forces you to admit something. You're not as in control as you thought. And your mind hates that. It wants certainty. It wants stability. It wants things to go according to plan. But life doesn't work that way. And deep down, you already know that. So here's the real question. If adversity is guaranteed, why are you still living like it isn't? Why are you surprised when things go wrong? Why do you expect life to stay predictable? That expectation is what makes adversity feel unbearable, because it breaks the illusion. And once that illusion breaks, you have two options. You either panic or you adapt. Now here's the part most people miss. Adaptation is a skill, and like any skill, it can be trained, but only if you stop avoiding discomfort. Because the people who handle adversity best are not the smartest, not the most talented, not the most successful. They're the most prepared. Prepared for things to go wrong, prepared for plans to fail, prepared for life to change without warning. So when it happens, they don't collapse, they adjust. And that adjustment is where strength begins. But here's the question most people never ask. How do you actually train for that? Because knowing this and living it are two very different things. And that's exactly what we're about to break down next. Let's be honest for a second. Most people are not preparing for adversity. They're preparing to avoid it. And that sounds smart until life stops cooperating. Because the more you organize your life around comfort, the less capable you become when discomfort is unavoidable. Pause. Think about your day. The small choices. You take the easier option. You delay difficult decisions. You avoid uncomfortable conversations. It feels harmless, but it's not. Because every time you choose comfort over challenge, you train yourself to be fragile. And fragile people don't handle pressure well. Here's a simple scenario. You need to have a difficult conversation with someone. You know it matters. You know it won't be easy. So what do? You wait. You overthink it. You rehearse it in your head. You tell yourself, I'll do it later. But later never comes, and the situation gets worse. Tension builds, misunderstandings grow, resentment quietly forms, until one day it explodes. Now suddenly it's overwhelming, and you tell yourself, this is too much. But here's the truth. It didn't become overwhelming overnight. It became overwhelming because you avoided it when it was small. Stop. This is where most people fail, not in big dramatic moments, but in small daily avoidance, because avoidance feels good in the moment, but it compounds, and eventually it costs you. Now here's the uncomfortable truth. Comfort doesn't protect you. It prepares you to break. Read that again, because this is the trap of modern life. Everything is designed to keep you comfortable. Endless entertainment, instant distraction, constant stimulation. You never have to be bored. You never have to sit with your thoughts. You never have to face yourself. And that creates a dangerous illusion that life should always feel easy. But when something difficult finally happens, you're not ready. Your mind panics because it's never practiced discomfort. Now compare that to someone who trains for it, someone who does things that are intentionally hard. They wake up early when they don't want to. They exercise when it's uncomfortable. They say what needs to be said, even when it's awkward. Not because they enjoy it, but because they understand something most people ignore. Discomfort is training. One Stoic insight captures this perfectly. If you wish to be strong, train for difficulty. Simple, but powerful. Because strength isn't built when life is easy. It's built when you want to quit, but don't. Now here's where it gets interesting. The people who avoid discomfort think they're protecting themselves, but they're doing the opposite. They're lowering their tolerance for reality. So when real adversity hits, even small problems feel overwhelming. But people who train discomfort, they expand their tolerance. So when something difficult happens, they don't overreact, because compared to what they've practiced, it's manageable. That's the difference. Not intelligence, not talent, tolerance. Now here's a quick pattern interrupt. Think about the last time you avoided something difficult. A message you didn't reply to, a task you delayed, a conversation you postponed. Now ask yourself, did avoiding it make it easier or worse? You already know the answer. And that awareness matters, because once you see the pattern, you can change it. Now here's the shift. Instead of asking, how do I stay comfortable? Start asking, where am I avoiding discomfort? That question alone can change your trajectory, because now you're not drifting, you're training. And here's what happens when you start doing this consistently. Your confidence changes. Not fake confidence, not surface-level motivation, real confidence, because you start proving something to yourself, that you can handle hard things, that you don't need perfect conditions, that you don't collapse under pressure. And once you realize that, something powerful happens. You stop fearing difficulty. You start using it. But there's still one problem. Even if you accept discomfort, even if you train for it, There's a moment where things still feel unfair, where your mind asks, why is this happening to me? And that question is more dangerous than you think, because how you answer it determines everything that comes next. And that's exactly what we're breaking down next. There's one question almost everyone asks when things go wrong, and it sounds harmless, logical even, but it quietly destroys your ability to grow. The question is, why is this happening to me? Pause. Because this is where people get stuck, not in the situation, but in the question. At first it feels natural. You want answers, you want fairness, you want things to make sense. But here's the problem. That question doesn't move you forward. It traps you in the past. It turns your focus toward blame, and blame feels productive, but changes nothing. Now watch this shift. What if instead you asked a different question? Not why me, but what can I do with this? That's it. Small shift, massive difference, because now you're not a victim of the situation, you're an operator inside it. Let's make this real. You fail something important, an exam, a project, an opportunity. Your first instinct, frustration. This shouldn't have happened. I deserved better. This isn't fair. And maybe that's true. But here's the uncomfortable reality. Fairness doesn't build strength. Response does. So instead of spiraling, you pause and you ask, what did this expose? Lack of preparation, weak focus, poor decisions. Now the failure has value. Now it teaches you something. Now it becomes useful. This is how Stoics think. They don't waste time wishing reality was different. They work with what exists. One of the most powerful Stoic ideas says, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Read that again, because most people miss what that actually means. It doesn't mean obstacles are good. It means obstacles are usable. They contain direction. They show you where to improve, where to adapt, where to grow, but only if you stop resisting them. Now here's where it gets uncomfortable, because accepting this idea means giving up something most people hold on to, the need to feel wronged. And that's hard, because feeling wronged feels justified. It feels like control, but it's not. It's a distraction, a way to avoid responsibility, and responsibility is where power actually lives. Now here's a pattern interrupt. Think about the last time something went wrong. Did you spend more time explaining it or improving from it? Be honest, because that answer reveals your default pattern, and your default pattern determines your future. Now here's the deeper truth. Adversity is neutral. It doesn't decide your outcome. It doesn't label you. It doesn't define you. It simply presents a situation, and your response writes the meaning. Two people lose the same opportunity. One says, this proves I'm not good enough. The other says, this shows me where I need to improve. Same event, completely different future. So what creates the difference? Interpretation. And interpretation is a choice, even when it doesn't feel like it. Now here's where this becomes powerful. Once you realize you control the meaning, you stop wasting experiences. Nothing becomes pointless. Not failure, not rejection, not setbacks. Everything becomes data. Everything becomes feedback. Everything becomes fuel. And suddenly, you're not afraid of things going wrong, because even when they do, you gain something. But there's still a challenge, because even if you understand this mentally, emotionally, it's harder. There are moments when things hit you hard, and in those moments, logic disappears, emotion takes over, and that's where most people lose control, not because they don't understand, but because they don't manage their reaction, and that leads to the next problem, what resilience actually is, and why most people get it completely wrong. Everyone talks about resilience, but almost nobody understands it. They think it means being tough, unemotional, unaffected, untouchable, but that's not resilience, that's suppression, and suppression always breaks, eventually. Pause, because this is where a lot of people get it wrong. They think strength means not feeling anything, so when something painful happens, they ignore it, they distract themselves, they push it down, they pretend it doesn't matter, but it does, and it builds, until one day it comes back stronger. Now here's the truth most people avoid. Real resilience doesn't remove pain, it changes how you respond to it. Let me show you what that looks like. Imagine this. You lose something important, a relationship, an opportunity, a version of your life you were attached to. Your first reaction? Pain. That's normal. That's human. Resilience doesn't eliminate that. It stabilizes what happens next. Instead of reacting immediately, you pause. Instead of spiraling, you observe. Instead of collapsing, you adjust. That's resilience, not control over emotion, control after emotion. Now here's where it gets powerful, because most people don't realize this. Your reaction is not automatic. It feels automatic, but it's trained through habits, through patterns, through repetition. And if you've spent years reacting emotionally, of course that's your default, but defaults can change. Now here's a pattern interrupt. Think about the last time something upset you, not something huge, something small, a comment, a delay, a situation not going your way. What happened next? Did you react immediately, or did you pause? Because that gap between event and reaction, that's where resilience lives. And most people have no gap. It's instant. Something happens. They react. No awareness, no control, just impulse. But resilient people, they create space, even if it's just a few seconds. And in that space, they choose. That's the difference. Now here's a Stoic insight that explains this perfectly. Man is not disturbed by things, but by the views he takes of them. Let that sink in, because it changes everything. It means the event isn't what controls you. Your interpretation is. Same situation, different mindset, different outcome. Now let's make this real. Two people receive criticism. One reacts instantly, defensive, frustrated, closed off. The other pauses, listens, processes, and asks, is there something useful here? Same moment, completely different result. One protects their ego, the other improves their life. Now here's where people struggle, because creating that gap requires awareness, and awareness requires practice. You don't just suddenly become calm under pressure. You train it in small moments, daily. When things don't go your way, you notice. When you feel irritation, you observe. When you want to react, you pause. At first it feels unnatural, slow, even frustrating. But over time, it becomes automatic. And something interesting happens. Situations that used to trigger you don't hit the same way anymore. Not because life got easier, but because you got steadier. Now here's the deeper truth. Most people don't want resilience. They want control. They want life to go exactly how they planned. They want predictability, certainty, stability. But life doesn't offer that, and chasing it creates anxiety. Because the more you try to control everything, the more fragile you become when something shifts. Resilient people understand something different. They don't try to control life. They train themselves to handle it. And that creates a different kind of strength, not rigid, flexible, like a tree in a storm. Rigid trees snap, flexible ones survive. Now here's the question most people never ask. What kind of strength are you building? Because if your strength depends on everything going right, it's not strength, it's dependence. And dependence breaks under pressure. But flexible strength, that adapts, that adjusts, that survives. And over time, that kind of strength creates something rare, stability. Not in your environment, but in yourself. And once you have that, something else begins to change, your ego. Because adversity has a way of exposing it. And if you don't learn to manage it, It will hold you back more than any obstacle ever could, and that's where we're going next. Here's something most people don't realize. It's not adversity that holds you back. It's your ego. Pause. Because this is uncomfortable. Your ego doesn't show up when things are easy. It shows up when you're challenged, when you're wrong, when you fail, when someone points out your flaws. That's when it speaks, and what it says sounds convincing. This isn't my fault. They don't understand me. I deserve better. And maybe, sometimes that's true. But here's the problem. Even when you're right, that mindset keeps you stuck because it protects your identity at the cost of your growth. Now let's make this real. You receive criticism, not extreme, not harsh, just honest. Your first instinct: defend, explain, justify, push back, because your ego feels attacked. It wants to stay intact. But here's the truth. Your ego doesn't care about improvement. It cares about being right. And those two things are not the same. Now here's the shift. Instead of asking, how do I defend myself? Ask, what if they're right? Just for a moment, not permanently, not blindly, just enough to consider it. Because inside criticism, even poorly delivered criticism, there's often something useful. But your ego blocks it. Now here's a pattern interrupt. Think about the last time someone corrected you. Did you listen or prepare your response? Because most people don't listen. They wait. They wait for their turn to speak, to defend, to protect. And in doing that, they miss the opportunity to improve. Now here's a Stoic idea that flips this completely. If anyone can show me I'm mistaken, I will gladly change. Think about how rare that is. Most people don't want to be corrected. They want to be validated. But validation doesn't create growth. Correction does. And correction requires humility. Now let's clarify something. Humility is not weakness. It's not thinking less of yourself. It's seeing yourself clearly. Strengths, weaknesses, blind spots, without distortion. Because when you see clearly, you can improve accurately. But when your ego is in control, you distort reality. You ignore flaws. You exaggerate strengths. You blame external factors, and that keeps you stuck. Now here's where adversity becomes powerful again. Because adversity forces humility. It doesn't ask, it reveals. You fail, and suddenly you can't pretend anymore. You lose something and realize you weren't as in control as you thought, and that realization hurts. But it's also valuable because it breaks the illusion, and once that illusion breaks, you can rebuild, stronger, smarter, more aware. Now here's the deeper truth. People who grow the fastest are not the most talented. They're the most honest. Honest about where they are, honest about what they lack, honest about what needs to change. And honesty requires humility. Now here's another micro scenario. You make a mistake, a clear one. What happens next? Do you admit it quickly, or do you try to cover it, shift blame, minimize it, avoid it? Because that moment, that small decision, determines your trajectory. Owning it feels uncomfortable, but it builds trust. Avoiding it feels easier, but it builds weakness. Now here's the key insight. Your ego wants comfort. Your growth requires discomfort, and you can't have both at the same time. So every time you're challenged, you're making a choice: protect your ego or improve your life. Now here's where this connects back to adversity, because adversity doesn't just test your strength, it tests your ego. Can you accept reality even when it doesn't favor you? Can you learn even when it's uncomfortable? Can you adjust even when it challenges your identity? Most people can't. That's why they stay the same. But the ones who can, they evolve. And over time, that evolution creates something powerful. Not just strength, not just resilience, but clarity. Clarity about who you are. Clarity about what you need to improve. Clarity about how to move forward. And once you have that clarity, adversity stops feeling personal. It starts feeling instructional. But there's one more layer to this, because adversity doesn't just change how you see yourself, it changes how you see others. And that shift is what turns strength into something deeper, something most people overlook. And that's what we're going into next. There's a reason adversity feels intense. It's not random, it's pressure, and pressure changes things. Pause. Think about how steel is made. It doesn't become strong by accident. It's exposed to heat, extreme heat, then hammered, shaped, refined, over and over again. Without that process, it stays weak, unformed, incomplete. Now here's the connection most people miss. Your life works the same way. Adversity is the forge, and you are the material being shaped. But here's where it gets uncomfortable, because not everyone who enters the forge comes out stronger. Some people come out worse, more bitter, more closed, more reactive. Others come out different, calmer, sharper, more focused. Same pressure, different result. So what determines the outcome? Response. Again, always response. Now here's a pattern interrupt. Think about a difficult period in your life, not something small, something that actually tested you. What did it leave behind? Did it make you stronger or more defensive? Because adversity always leaves a mark. The question is, what kind? Now here's a Stoic insight that explains this perfectly. No man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity. At first, that sounds wrong. Why would someone without hardship be unhappy? But think deeper. If you've never been tested, you don't know your strength. If you've never struggled, you don't develop resilience. If you've never failed, you don't learn how to recover. So when difficulty finally arrives, you're unprepared. And that's where real suffering begins, not in adversity itself, but in the inability to handle it. Now compare that to someone who has been tested, not once, repeatedly. They've failed, they've lost, they've adapted, and through that process, they've built something most people don't have: stability. Not because life is stable, but because they are. Now here's where the transformation happens. At first, adversity feels overwhelming. Then, it becomes manageable. Eventually, it becomes familiar. And that's the shift. Because once something becomes familiar, it stops being scary. And once it stops being scary, you stop avoiding it. Now here's the deeper truth. The goal is not to eliminate adversity. That's impossible. The goal is to become someone who can handle it. And that changes everything. Because now, when something goes wrong, you don't panic. You assess. You adjust. You move. Now, here's another pattern interrupt. Notice how different that feels. Not emotional, not chaotic, controlled, deliberate. That's what the forge creates. Not perfection, precision. Now here's where people go wrong. They think strength comes from one big moment, one test, one breakthrough, one defining experience. But that's not how it works. Strength is built in repetition, small challenges, daily discomfort, consistent pressure. Over time, that compounds. And eventually, you become someone different. Not because you tried to be, but because you were shaped into it. Now here's the part most people never notice. When you've been through enough adversity, your confidence changes. Not loud confidence, not performative confidence, quiet confidence. The kind that doesn't need validation because it's built on evidence. You've seen yourself struggle and recover. You've seen yourself fail and adapt. You've seen yourself face difficulty and survive. And that creates something powerful: trust. Trust in your ability to handle what comes next. And that trust removes one of the biggest fears people carry, the fear of the unknown. Because most people aren't afraid of the future. They're afraid of themselves in the future. They don't trust their ability to deal with it. But once you've been tested, That changes. Now here's the question. What would your life look like if you trusted yourself to handle anything? Think about that, because that level of confidence is rare, and it's not built in comfort. It's built in the forge. But there's one final shift, one final realization that turns all of this into something bigger, something freeing. Because once you truly understand this, you stop fearing failure completely, and that changes how you live. Let's finish this. At the beginning, we talked about a moment, the moment when everything falls apart, when plans fail, when control disappears, when life doesn't go the way you expected. And in that moment, a question appears. Who will you become now? Now here's what most people don't realize. That moment never goes away. It just shows up in different forms, different situations, different stages of life, different levels of pressure. But the question stays the same, and how you answer it becomes your identity. Pause. Because this is where everything connects. Comfort, avoidance, ego, resilience, adversity. It all leads here to one final shift. Most people spend their lives trying to avoid failure. They play it safe. They stay predictable. They choose certainty over growth, not because they lack ambition, but because they fear what failure means. They think failure defines them, that it proves something about their worth, their ability, their future. But here's the truth. Failure doesn't define you. Your response does. And once you understand that, failure loses its power. Now here's a pattern interrupt. Think about something you've been avoiding, something you know matters, but haven't acted on. Why? Be honest. Is it because it's impossible, or because it might not work? Because that hesitation, that fear, is what holds most people back. Not lack of opportunity, not lack of ability, fear of failure. Now imagine this. What if failure didn't mean the end? What if it meant information, feedback, adjustment, progress? What would you do differently? What would you attempt? What would you stop avoiding? Because the moment failure stops being personal, it becomes useful. And once it becomes useful, you stop fearing it. Now here's the Stoic insight that brings this all together. Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one. No waiting, no overthinking, no perfect conditions. Action. Because everything you've heard so far means nothing without action. Understanding adversity doesn't make you stronger. Facing it does. Thinking about resilience doesn't build it. Practicing it does. Now here's where this becomes real. The next time something goes wrong, and it will, watch what happens. Your mind will react. It always does. Frustration, resistance, the urge to escape. But this time, pause, just for a moment, and remember this. This is the test. Not later, now. This is where you decide whether you repeat the same patterns or become something different. Now here's the final realization. The people who seem calm under pressure, who adapt quickly, who don't break when things go wrong, they're not special. They've just been through the forge, repeatedly, and instead of resisting it, they used it. They learned from it. They grew through it. And over time, they became someone who doesn't fear difficulty because they trust themselves. Now imagine living like that. Not avoiding challenges, but walking toward them. Not fearing the unknown, but being ready for it. Not hoping life is easy, but knowing you can handle it when it's not. That's freedom. Not control over life, control over yourself. And once you have that, life stops feeling like something happening to you and starts feeling like something you can navigate, no matter what changes, no matter what breaks, no matter what comes next. And when that next moment arrives, that unexpected setback, that failure, that disruption, the question will return, quietly, powerfully, the same question from the beginning. Who will you become now? And this time, you'll have an answer.